Powerpuff Girls is getting another reboot. And judging how the fanbase got polarized because of the very first reboot of the Powerpuff Girls, I'm not even sure what to expect in the near future. I mean, I can guarantee you that they're going to be thankful that it's not going to be the same as the first reboot, but at the same time, I have no idea. And since I'm not going to be reviewing the Loud House's Flip Miss Carol episode this month, and I'm going to be saving it for the following years, I decided to review another Christmas Carol episode from the Powerpuff Girls reboot called You're a Good Man, Mojo Jojo. Now, there are a lot of episodes from this show that is worth discussing, but when it comes to the season of Christmas and the classic Christmas Carol stories, I really don't even think that this show is really good at capitalizing the formula, because ever since I watched this episode, not only it just got me really confused, but the fact that the world building in this reboot is completely non-existent. Judging by this episode, I can guarantee you that the other episodes are like this. Well, the characters, mainly the villains, don't go completely over the top and stick to their personality similar to the original. And when it comes to the Powerpuff Girls themselves, regardless if they didn't intentionally went into Mojo's mind when he's dreaming, it really feels a lot more off the fact that they just allow him to destroy the city in the same fashion as before. Not to mention that there isn't a single time in this entire episode where anyone mentions Christmas. Instead, it's generic tree lighting day, and this is a further indication that anyone who has been working on this episode, or this show in general, can tell that this isn't a good idea. But to be honest, the minor details in this episode is only just going to distract me a lot more compared to the bigger issues of this episode in general. So, let's just cut all the minor details and let's get into the villain, Mojo Jojo. In all honesty, the fact that this episode requires him to be part of a Christmas Carol scenario, well, the three Powerpuff Girls are the ghosts of past, present, and future, it feels off. Like, really, really off. Mojo Jojo is one of the main villains of the Powerpuff Girls, and regardless if this is a reboot, you can't expect me to believe that he would have a dream like this and have a change of heart at the last minute only to turn evil because of what we're going to be getting into at the end of this episode. Let me tell you, I really think that this entire Christmas Carol gimmick between the Powerpuff Girls and Mojo Jojo is completely out of place, all because of the main villain. One of the biggest examples that I do not buy this story is that in the first flashback that we've seen, Mojo as a baby saves the professor's life. Well, not really, well, technically, the professor would still survive, but considering that this actually contradicts Mojo's character to the point that he wouldn't do something like this, then it's really questionable onto how that Mojo Jojo became evil in this reboot, while in the original series, if you saw the movie at least, you would have an indication that he turned evil and became one of the most recognizable antagonists in Cartoon Network history. Even from someone who doesn't watch the Powerpuff Girls, are still familiar with the characters, and just by seeing Mojo in this reboot, you can't make the argument that it's a reboot, get used to it. It doesn't change the fact that Mojo has turned evil after the events of the first flashback. And it just really feels odd to see him in this position, all because he had a random dream that the Powerpuff Girls are just basically ghosts, and I can guarantee you that they were not responsible with the whole dream that Mojo had. And for me personally, the flashbacks themselves and JoJo's dream from the Powerpuff Girls as ghosts aren't really that convincing. I mean, the Bubbles flashbacks is somewhat understandable, but mainly the first and last, it doesn't even feel really natural, especially since that during the Buttercup sequence. After the destruction of Townsville, the bad guys completely kicked Mojo out of his place, and Buttercup says that he will live in his mother's basement, and he had to work at retail for the rest of his life. Apparently, that's the only way for Mojo to have a change of heart, and you can't convince me that this is possible. I mean, I know this is a reboot, but there is no way you can convince me that Mojo will have this state in mind that people are going to take over his home or facility, and he's gonna be working at retail permanently. The only way for these types of events to happen in the future is when the Powerpuff Girls are gone. Like, it's the only way for all of this to happen, and the fact that Mojo Jojo had a dream like this and didn't have second thoughts really convinces me that every single character in this show, especially from this episode in particular, are underutilized. So, the way the Powerpuff Girls and the other characters are portrayed in this show really feels really off-putting, and the fact that they're just doing their own thing while the other characters, mainly Mojo Jojo, are just dealing with some random trip that just gave them an instant change of heart because generic tree light ceremony or whatever, not Christmas in general. And to be honest, the fact that this entire episode is avoiding the word Christmas just speaks louder than words. And if it wasn't enough, the ending just makes this entire episode pointless with everything falling apart. Like, whenever I look at this ending, even if I'm not a fan of the show, it sums up everything of the fact that this reboot was a waste of time, regardless of the good qualities it offered. After the dream Mojo Jojo had, he is a redeemed villain by sending gifts to everyone in the generic tree line ceremony or celebration, and this only leads to the townspeople still against Mojo, and they actually want him to destroy the tree. I'm not making this up, they're actually wanting Mojo to destroy the tree during a ceremony or celebration during the holidays. You know, I would question the mindset of the townspeople, the fact that they want a villain to ruin their day, especially during the holidays, regardless if they're not saying the word Christmas. But this is basically the representation of what the Parliament Naughty plaque is in this reboot compared to the original. Like, if the plaque does exist in this universe, then I'm gonna be convinced that Mojo Jojo is part of the plaque, and it will lead to everyone in Townsville not giving him any sympathy whatsoever, nor a chance to redeem himself. But if that isn't the case, then I can guarantee you that everyone is completely insane, and they're just enforcing this ending to happen without any kind of an actual payoff. Let's be real with you, I honestly felt like that the reason why they didn't mention Christmas in this episode is because they know it's not going to be a good episode and just a bad episode. And it kind of sums up onto why that in another episode settling around the holidays, they mention Christmas. So to be perfectly real with you, watching this episode really feels empty to the point that it's just basically there for the sake of having another holiday episode. Which is also completely stupid because there was another Christmas episode from the show that aired the following year. So, I honestly felt like that this Christmas episode or holiday episode honestly feels like a worthless experience involving a reboot from a show that had other Christmas episodes along with a Christmas special. If it wasn't obvious enough, this episode is bad, but I've seen other episodes that are much more worse than this, and when it comes to Christmas episodes, this is literally one of the worst Christmas episodes I've witnessed in recent memory. Granted, it's not as bad as the Teen Titans Go Christmas episode that I reviewed 4 years ago, but believe me when I say this, whenever I look at this episode in particular involving the Powerpuff Girls and the fact that it's a reboot, it just makes me question, how is it difficult to make a good Christmas episode? I mean, it doesn't need to be spectacular, but at the same time, you don't have to be lazy with it. Look, if you can't stand the multiple Christmas carols plots, I understand, but for me personally, they're entertaining regardless if they're overused, but the fact that this episode got me bored and just raises more questions gave me the indication that they just can't be able to do a Christmas Carol right by having a different character replace the role of Mojo Jojo. Seriously, it's really difficult to think that they just went with Mojo Jojo instead of a character that actually fit with the role, like Princess Marbucks. But to be honest with you, I've seen a clip involving Princess Marbucks hanging out with the Powerpuff Girls a long time ago, and judging by that, it really feels like that I didn't realize that this show was terrible for different reasons and not good for the reboot reasons. I mean, the only praise I can give from this show is the voice actors of the Powerpuff Girls. I mean, you can make the argument that they're not as good as the original Powerpuff Girls, but it honestly feels like it really fits for the reboot style. So that's the only plus I can give in this reboot. But when it comes to this episode itself, it gave me a terrible impression of this reboot, and I'm giving this episode a 4 out of 10. If you ask me, just watch the 'Twas the Fight Before Christmas special, because as far as I'm concerned, it's a much more better executed special, especially that it's almost 20 years old. As for this reboot, all I can say is that the next reboot will probably learn the mistakes from this reboot.